We're gonna see how this looks and how this goes, reading it. I'm gonna read it, basically. Dear Travel, for as long as I can remember, you've been the one. You've been the one to keep me up at night. You're the one I daydream about. You're the one that I never cease to desire. You're like the first kiss with someone just barely outside of my league. You're like a light beer in the sun after a long day's work. You're like that first high off of a new drug. The only difference is that no matter how much of you I dose, no matter how fiendishly I desire to shoot up, it's always just as good as that first time. Hell, most of the time it's even better. No matter where I go, no matter what I see, no matter who I meet, it has always been you, Travel. It will always be you. Speaking of first, just like that first kiss, just like that first love, there was a first with you, at least for my definition of travel. Now, don't get me wrong, when I was growing up, we went all over. I was a child of parents who were a byproduct of National Lampoon and the American dream of the ideal family trip. We went to Disney and we went to the beaches. We saw New York, we saw California. We drove from one end of the country to the next in an RV, stopping at every roadside attraction you can imagine. And believe me, there are a lot. I have seen more than my share of reptile museums and world's largest something and suches. And in its own right and in its own way, it was glorious. But I always longed for more. It kind of became a running joke in the family. When I was engaged, one of our first joint Christmas presents was a wander list, a board where we could capture everywhere that we wanted to go and everywhere that we had already been. A board on which we could paint the mural of our lives. That marriage never came to be, and that board never lived long enough to be filled, but that didn't stop me from finding you. It led me to you. It wasn't long after that I went to Japan, my own white whale of travel. It was my first time leaving the good old US of A in a way that didn't entail a resort on the beach, that was really just an extension of America's colonial habits. After months of anticipation, I boarded my least favorite mode of travel with one of my best friends and journeyed for 12 hours over 16 time zones to get my first taste of you and travel. You were worth it. I'll never forget that first bite of fried lotus root, that first meal. Biru, onigashimasu, and chicken cartilage, and sukemono, and sashimi, and the plates just kept coming. And it was a 20-plus waking hour fever dream and travel. It was everything. I will never forget that first utterance of the most beautiful language I've ever heard. I will never forget that first bite of nigiri, the bite that changed my understanding of food, the sights and sounds of the fish market, my first Michelin star meal, my first earthquake. First after first after first after first, it just kept coming. It woke something up in me. It was the first breath of a life that was more authentic, more me. And that is your greatest gift, travel. You give us back pieces of ourselves that we didn't know existed. All you ask in return is that we leave pieces of ourselves behind wherever we go. In my experience, it's a fair trade. The first breath of my new life happened in November of 2019, which, as I'm sure you well know, my love, was a tense time for our relationship. Just like I'll never forget the sights and sounds and feelings of that first trip, I will never forget what it felt like to have it all ripped away, trip after trip, visa after visa, dream after dream, just gone. It seemed like every time I felt like I could start to breathe again, every time there was hope, the world changed, our understanding changed. We learned something new about this thing that was already as new could be, and it felt like maybe we would never be reunited. So in the absence of you, in the absence of my dream, I used that time to get myself right, to make myself a better partner for you, or at least I tried to. I met my best friend, I sold a home, I invested into hobbies and passions and teachers and therapies and lessons, and in my health, I turned everywhere else there was to turn because I couldn't turn to you. I learned a lot, I gained a lot, I healed a lot, and then the world started to look a little more normal. One jab, two jab, next thing I knew there was a crack in the door, I slipped my foot in and stepped through, I could breathe again. I spent almost half of 2021 in a country that wasn't my own, 7 of them to be precise. Every single one of them brought a new set of firsts, a new height to chase, a new facet of your beautiful body to explore. From the beaches of Greece to the canals of Amsterdam to the melting pot of Belgium to the epicenter of tragedy in Berlin to far, far too much Pilsner Urquell in Prague to my beloved Barcelona and then the romance of Paris and so many places in between. So many friends, so many strangers, and so much food. I rode my body hard during that time. If one's body is meant to be a temple, I hadn't prayed at months. It took its toll. I went home. Most days I felt ill. I had created what I thought was my dream, and then I let that dream consume me. More had become more than I could bear. More couldn't possibly have sounded more bad if it tried. Now, travel, my dear, this was not your fault. The fault was mine. I thought that if I could just add up enough experiences, enough sights, enough sounds, enough meals, enough people, enough, then maybe, just maybe, finally it would feel like I was enough for you and enough for me and enough for everyone in my life that I had always tried to be enough for. There was a night out at a bar where a stranger told me he knew exactly the type of person I was. Just another young man searching for answers and collecting experiences for his little life, never really seeking to understand, but just collecting little odd pieces of furniture to tell his friends back home about, trying to become more interesting instead of allowing himself to be interested and fade into the background. And at the time, I was furious. He couldn't possibly understand me or what we have, travel. He doesn't know and he doesn't get it, and he never could because he doesn't look at you the way that I do. He was right, though. I stopped trying to learn from you and started trying to exert my control over you, and I think this is why most relationships fail. It was time for us to take a break before ours did. In that time away from you, I tried to undo all the things that I had done and unlearn all the things that I had learned, unsee all of the things that I had seen. It took me all of 3 days back on home turf in the US of A to get right back to having an above average day job for my above average life and my above average apartment. But if you'll notice, the word average is still omnipresent. To steal a term I would learn in 22, I was playing not to lose, doing just enough to maintain appearances instead of leveraging what I had learned to become more of who I had always been. I tried to hide away and become who I had thought I always should be. I broke promises to see and stay in touch with people. I turned down trips I had committed to. I skipped weddings. I said no. I ran and I hid. I became small in the hopes that you would gloss over me, forget about me, that maybe in that smallness I could forget about you. I could forget about who I was almost ready to be. I'm sorry, travel. I miss you, travel. The good news is, in that time apart, I learned something. I learned that things aren't quite the same without you to look forward to in my life. I learned that the fault was never yours. That you always wanted me to become exactly who I've always been, that you were just trying to guide me there. And if I'm willing to listen, if I'm willing to be more interested than interesting, if I'm willing to let go of expectations and postures and just be me and stop trying to be somebody that I think other people want me to be, our relationship can be what it was always meant to be. I can learn from you what I've always been meant to learn. Will you take me back, travel? Next month, I finally get to go back to where all this started for us, travel. After 3 years, I get to go back to Japan. Isn't that great? I'm excited to see you there. You see, this whole time I was trying to avoid going where I've always been meant to go because I was afraid of becoming who I've always been meant to be, and I am not afraid anymore. You taught me that. As I sit here and order plane tickets and train tickets and book hotels and daydream about the weeks to come, I can feel you again. You never actually left. I know that now. But I stopped listening, and I stopped looking. I'm writing this letter before I get there in the hopes that you and I can have a clean slate. In the hopes that things can go back to the way they used to be, back before I got too smart for my own good, and before I started to just try and collect experiences that were never mine to own. I hope this letter is enough to adequately convey just how much you mean to me and just how much I have learned from you, because it has always been you, travel. It's always been you. I love you. I'll see you soon.